2 months after plunging the DotA world into chaos with 7.23, the frog has given us another patch, but will it restore order or will it just add to the chaos? Let's find out.
My holiness deepens.
Welcome to the Church of Obelisk. In this video I'm going to go through the most important changes of the patch, and I'm going to focus especially on changes that affect micro heroes, which is what my channel is all about after all. So right from the get-go we have a very significant change here. Heroes now have a dedicated neutral item slot. A maximum of 1 neutral item can be equipped on your hero. This is especially significant for the kinds of heroes that benefit a lot from getting multiple stat items, various carries that can just sometimes run away with games if they just get like 2 or 3 of these good neutral items at the start, and you just stack those on your carry. Even if he's not having a good game, he's going to have a good game after that. So that reduces some of the randomness. It also means that items are going to be spread out a little bit more. But it also unfortunately means that Lone Druid kind of gets shafted. He was a hero that benefited a lot from having all these neutral items because he has so many slots. So you always had room for all these items that your teammates no longer needed. And now you can only have 1 item on your hero and 1 item on your bear. So the way this looks in game is like this. You have here an extra slot, and you can just use these items. You can put them into your backpack, but you can't put them into your main inventory. Put them in the backpack. They have a 6-second cooldown, just like normal. Bear also has this slot here. And what? You can only target trees? What? You can no longer target creeps with Iron Talon? Okay. I didn't. That's not documented here in the patch notes. Very interesting. Very interesting. Is that a new bug? Yeah, this doesn't work. Okay. So Iron Talon no longer works on creeps. Very interesting. And what you now can do is you can send those items back to your neutral stash, which is a new thing that exists in the game. It looks like this. Here with your shop you also have this neutral thing. And now you can just get these into your stash and have them delivered with your courier. You now get 4 items per tier, and you get more items from Ancients, which makes sense. It always seemed kind of strange that Ancients had the same chance of dropping items as like regular small camp creeps. Then here's another big one, the removed shrines. And instead they moved the outposts to the primary jungles. Outposts now have less vision as ground, and now they start being owned by each is owned by one of the teams at the start, and they also moved some camps around here. So let's look at how this looks on the actual map. So you have this shrine here. It doesn't have very much vision. It's only this big, the vision. So you have this at the start. The enemy has this outpost at the start, also just with a little bit of vision. And here, there's just nothing here now. No side shop, no nothing on the side lanes here. So this is going to make it, I guess, a little easier to control your own jungle. But of course, later in the game, enemy can just invade this and take over your outpost. So I guess later on in the game, you're often going to end up with a situation where you each control your enemy's outposts, because typically you tend to want to play your off lane in the late stages of the game. So you typically farm like primarily in this part of the game, this part of the map, or maybe more realistically like something like this, because that's generally easier part of the map to control. And then the DotA generally controls something like this. So often the shrines or the outposts are actually going to be owned by the quote-unquote enemy team. At least that's what I would suspect. This also means the map is now effectively smaller. With the introduction of these outposts and the side lanes here, that sort of opened up the map and meant that you had to cross greater distances on the map. But now that everything is moved closer to the middle, mobility and boots of travel is going to be a bit less important than in 723. Another big change is they removed all GPM talents, and generally the talents they replaced them with tend to be a bit weaker. So heroes with GPM talents were just nerfed across the board. They have higher hero respawn time at early levels, which makes a lot of sense. In 723, as well as in previous patches, it just didn't really matter anymore if you died in the early game. Like, those deaths at the first couple of levels hardly even mattered unless the creeps were pushing into your tower and you were losing last hits that way. As long as you just could TP back to lane, dying just didn't feel very impactful, and so now you're going to be punished a little bit more if you die at the start, so this I think makes a lot of sense. Buyback cost slightly adjusted here. Courier deaths no longer disable your passive gold income, but courier deaths are otherwise a bit more impactful. You get more gold for killing them, and the respawn time is also a bit longer, but couriers is also slightly faster, but they can no longer use items. This was sort of a niche usage for couriers because they were so fragile, but sometimes you could use those couriers to like ward and de-ward, but that's no longer possible. Another interesting general change is that melee attacks now have a bonus range against Observer and Sentry wards, which means that melee heroes can now de-ward all sorts of wards on cliffs without needing a Quelling Blade. And speaking of which, Quelling Blade no longer kills wards, so this is a very necessary change given that they changed Quelling Blade in that way. And tier 5 items now drop at 60 minutes, which means you now actually have a chance of seeing those items in an actual game. And some of these items have been nerfed as a result. Onto the neutral items. A lot of these are very minor changes, like this one, Arcane Ring, int, +2 int. You don't need me to tell you that this means the item is slightly better. I'm just going to go over the more impactful changes. So one big thing is that they abandoned this concept of having items that are recipes that require you to buy some items to complete them. Like the Ironwood tree now no longer requires 3 branches, but it gives you 1 less to all stats. And also the same thing for Vambrace. It no longer requires any items, it's just an item by itself. And this means that you no longer need to invest like 1,000 gold into this item, but it gets slightly less stats. But very importantly, it can now be toggled between different attributes. So this makes this item much stronger than it used to be. This item was kind of not very good because it didn't really give you any bonuses. The only thing it really gave you is like it freed up a slot, which is nice and all, but compared to many of the other strong tier 2 items, Vambrace was kind of underwhelming. But now it's just really strong, especially this toggling mechanic. So it works kind of like treads now. You can toggle it between the different attributes. Toggling here is not as efficient. It's not as impactful as with treads because you basically are changing like 5 stats around because you always get 5 of the non-primary attributes. But still, it's a nice little bonus to this otherwise already very strong item. Another conceptual change is to Iron Talon. It no longer has the Quell passive, but instead gives now 15 attack speed. It was kind of an awkward item because if you use this on a melee hero, you already have a Quelling Blade in almost all cases. And on a ranged hero, it's not really good because the passive is not very good on ranged heroes. So in the past, this item was kind of underwhelming, especially because it's no longer really very strong to reduce a creep's HP by 50% at the 7-minute mark when you can get this item at the earliest. So it makes sense, makes the item a bit stronger. But as we've just seen, the item is bugged, so it doesn't actually work. So until they fix that, the item is going to be very weak. But that's certainly a bug, that's certainly not intended. So I guess the next hot fix that's going to be changed. Poor Shield gets a big buff. It's another one of these items that returns to the game, but which weren't very strong because you just got them too late. And now it gives you a bit more damage block, making the item a lot more relevant. Unfortunately, this also nerfs a lot of the kind of heroes I like to play. It nerfs all these summons and creep-based heroes. It's especially devastating for Visage. If you're playing as a ranged hero, if they have a Pullman shield, it now reduces your damage by 50% if you have level 1 birds, whereas previously they only reduced it by 25%. So this is quite a bad change for a hero like Visage in those games where permanent shield drops. But overall I think this is a great change, makes the item a lot more relevant. Repair Kit loses its multi-shot ability, but its passive health regen is buffed. Overall definitely a nerf. As we already talked about, all these high tier items, tier 5 items, a bunch of them were nerfed, which makes sense because they now drop at 60 minutes. Fusion Rune was just removed entirely from the game, and Phoenix Ash also removed entirely from the game. So 2 more items down, 60 more to go basically. But yeah, that's a whole bunch of nerfs to these tier 7 items, which makes sense because they are quite ridiculous if you actually manage to get them to drop. On to the item changes that actually matter. We have Enchanted Mango being nerfed. Mango was a really strong item in 723. It was already quite strong before, but now that you could stack it up to 3 mangoes in one slot, it was just an incredibly valuable item. So it makes sense to nerf it a little bit, and it's definitely a nerf that's going to hurt. But I still think we're going to see plenty of mangoes being used. Quelling Blade no longer kills wards. It's kind of a big deal for dewarding battles, especially if you have invisible heroes like Ricky, heroes like Sand King. For them now you actually have to auto-attack these wards instead of just being able to eat them with a Quelling Blade or a Tango. Some adjustments to mana regen. Vlad's mana regen gets nerfed a little bit. Void Stones and Perseverances gets buffed a bit. That makes sense, like Void Stone was so bad compared to all these other newfangled methods of mana regen, so it makes sense to buff it a little bit. Battle Fury gets a bit of a side grade, has more damage, and does more cleave to heroes, but less cleave to creeps. So it's gonna be maybe slightly worse at farming, but better at actual fighting, and overall I think this is definitely a buff. Maelstrom gets another slight nerf, still a very efficient item, so that makes sense. Necro gets a fairly irrelevant buff, some extra mana regen. It's cool I guess, but not that important. Desolator gets a minor nerf. The duration used to be 15 seconds, now it's 7 seconds. That's still a lot of time, so I guess that nerf makes sense. Radiance gets a nerf, which I don't quite understand. I think Radiance was in a pretty good spot. It was an item that was strong, that was useful, but not too strong, so I'm not really sure why they're nerfing that. Blade Mail was kind of underbought, so it gets a nice little buff. Blade Mail is actually an item that has really good stats. It's one of those items that doesn't require a recipe, and you get all the stats from the components, plus a little bit extra, so this has 18 damage, here you get 28 damage, so you get plus 10 damage, you get plus 2 armor, and you get plus 4 int. So just a pretty efficient stats item. Of course, you're never going to buy it purely for the stats, but as long as you get like a moderate use out of this active, it's actually quite strong. And another factor to consider is that you're no longer going to have these neutral items cluttering up your inventory. So these mid-range items that are expensive enough that you don't want to sell them, but cheap enough that they fill up your inventory quickly, now get a little bit stronger. Then we have a bunch of underbought items, Silver Edge, Mask of Madness and Armlet, getting slight buffs. All that makes sense. Then those crit items get a bit of a side grade. They have slightly more damage now, but less crit, so they're going to be a bit stronger early on, but weaker later on in the game. And that of course means that the kind of heroes that rely on these really big crits, heroes like a Sven, like a Kunkka, like a TA, scale slightly worse in this new patch, but only slightly. On to the heroes. I'm not going to look through all these changes, just going to look at some of the bigger changes here. Chaos Knights get some pretty nice buffs. These are all fairly minor changes, but in combination they are quite good. He loses the GPM talent, but since he's usually a carry, you're not really picking this GPM talent very often anyway. And plus 10 second Phantasm duration is actually excellent, so I feel like Chaos Knight is going to be really strong in this new patch. Chen loses his GPM talent, gets replaced by a Hand of God cooldown talent. No one asked for that. It's just not that strong of a talent. I think most of the time you probably want to go for the other one. The other one is plus 1000 base HP to all your creeps, which is a pretty strong talent. But especially in position 5 gen, it's usually kind of underwhelming because you get it so late in the game. But then this 30-second Hand of Gold cooldown thing is also not very enticing. So I don't know, probably take the HP talent now in most cases. And that's just like a slight nerf to Chen. Darkseer Surge gets a little bit of a rework. It now always has plus 70% bonus speed, but now it's the duration that scales. I think this makes level 1 Surge a little bit better, and at level 4 it's going to be the same again. DP gets a bunch of buffs. These are all fairly minor buffs, but there's 3 buffs here in this patch, and in combination that's definitely going to make the hero a lot more relevant. Disruptor was very popular at the major, so he gets some nerfs. Same for Doom. Honestly, I would have expected them to nerf Doom even harder, but all these nerfs are actually fairly modest. But there's 3 of them, so it's not nothing. Dragon Knight gets a pretty nice buff here. 10 movement speed is always very welcome. You lose 5 of those movement speeds when you go into Elder Dragon form, but still, 10 movement speed is a lot. Enigma gets a little bit of a buff to Malefice. At high levels you get a bit more damage. It's not very relevant, but I'll take it, I guess. The GPM talent is lost and replaced by this rather underwhelming damage talent to Malefice. Like, who cares about that at that stage of the game? I'd much rather have the cooldown reduction, so I think this is just straight nerf to Enigma, this change here. But this is going to make up for it, I guess. Grimstroke gets a bunch of buffs. He has more base in. This level 10 talent, I guess, is a bit weaker, but level 15 talents both get quite a bit stronger. Io gets a couple of nerfs. Very significant buffs to Juggernaut. 4 base damage is a lot, and base movement speed is always a very welcome addition, especially in a hero like Juggernaut, who needs to run people down. Lich gets a bunch of nerfs, very expected, one of the strongest supports at the major. Lycan gets some pretty good buffs here. Plus 4 base int, which is a lot for a hero like Lycan, who doesn't have that much int, and who has very expensive spells. And then you also reduce the shapeshift transformation time. This is also fairly big. It just takes forever to transform into that wolf, and now it's going to be a little bit quicker. So this is not like a huge buff, but it's definitely going to be very welcome, and I feel like Lycan was already a pretty decent hero. Magnus, of course, gets a bunch of nerfs. Very deserved, very annoying hero. Medusa has been buffed so many times in a row that at some point she's going to be really strong. Is this patch the time when she becomes strong enough? I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see Medusa taking off either in this patch or very soon if she gets some more buffs. Nyx gets some very nice buffs. Vendetta is now pure damage instead of physical. The damage gets reduced slightly, but overall this is a huge buff. And then this level 10 talent change. You lose the gold talent, which hurts a bit, but this is also a pretty strong talent, I think. So I'm not sure if that hurts you that much. So I think Nyx definitely much stronger now. And what is this? Like, who wants a 20 Ignite DPS talent? Bunch of nerfs to Omni-Knight. He was one of the meta heroes of the major. Makes sense. PA gets some love. She was kind of weak in previous patches, so extra base damage is going to help a lot. PL gets some very slight nerfs. Puck, of course, another very strong meta hero, gets some more nerfs. Makes sense. We see a very strange buff for Pugna. Plus 8 base agi. I don't know, it's like a little bit of extra armor, a little bit of extra attack speed. I guess I'll take it, but kind of random. Quap gets some love. She was kind of underused, just not very strong in this meta. Gets a pretty hefty increase in her int gain, as well as a slight buff to higher levels of Sonic Wave. Slardar gets some major buffs. 10 base movement speed is huge, especially on a hero like Slardar, who has an ability to increase his speed by a percentage. And you also have the Splash of the Deep, which now is slightly better at lower levels. Slark gets his axe nerfed, makes sense. Snapfire added to Captain's mode, but less base damage. Spectre now has a lot of extra base health regen. It's a 1.5 extra regen, that's actually huge. It's going to make it so much easier for Spectre to lane, as well as just to farm. It makes it a lot easier to jungle now. You just have this extra ring of regen for free. Sven gets some nice buffs. He was kind of underpicked, so it makes sense. Remove this hero from DotA, please. Terrorblade gets some nice little minor buffs. Same for Tidehunter. Tinker gets a very strange change, like plus 2 seconds much of the machine durations. Who cares about that? Tiny gets a pretty big nerf. He was one of the strongest position 4 heroes at the major, so he gets a pretty big nerf here. Another strong support hero at the major was Stream Protector. He gets honestly fairly modest nerfs. This strength gain thing is completely irrelevant. Nature's Grasp mana costs, okay, it's fairly minor. And then the living armor, I think it's the armor that's reduced here. That's, I guess, a nerf, but overall fairly modest changes. I was kind of confused when I read this, but I just tested it out. At first when I read this I thought that it meant that you can now dominate zombies, which makes no sense. But what it actually means is that the aura now works on zombies. So if you have Undying, the zombies now have bonus damage, which apparently before they did not. So that's nice, I guess. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you can farm a handle Dominator on Undying, maybe that's a build now. And also now the bonus damage talent is base damage, which makes Dominator even better on Undying. It's still a problem actually farming Dominator in a reasonable time, but I guess it's now a good item on Undying. There's a whole bunch of other minor changes here on Undying. On the whole, that's definitely a buff, like especially the buffs to Flesh Golem. This plus 30 movement speed is especially big. It also lasts a lot longer now, so this ultimate especially is going to be much stronger now. Our boy Visage has kind of been Ice Frog's whipping boy, and in this patch you get a buff, but it's a buff that's honestly kind of insultingly small. The Soul Assumption gather damage threshold is reduced here. This means you get your charges for your Soul Assumption slightly quicker, and mana cost has been adjusted from a mana cost that went down from 170 to 140. It's now a constant 150. Which means it's now a lot cheaper at level 1, but slightly more expensive at level 4, since it's usually the ability that you max out last, especially if you're playing it as a core. If you're playing as support, maybe you max this out earlier, but usually you play Visage as a core and then you max this out last, so it's going to take a while for you to get to this 140 in a normal game. So this is a slight buff, but on the whole it just doesn't change very much. Void Spirit added to Captain's modes. I have a feeling that this hero is going to be really strong once the pros actually start really practicing this hero. But we have to wait and see how strong it's actually going to be when he's put into the pro scene. Winter Wyvern, another one of these meta supports, gets some nerfs here. And Witch Doctor, a support that's fallen out of favor, gets some slight buffs. Notably absent from this patch is our boy Lone Druid, who with this change gets a little bit of a nerf, but otherwise escapes unharmed. In terms of his items, he even gets like a slight buff because now you have this Mask of Madness which gets buffed. Like Lone Druid is one of the very few heroes who actually bought this item in the last patch, so it's a nice buff, I guess. If you go with the Radiance route, it's going to be slightly weaker here, and Desert are also going to be very slightly weaker. But in terms of items generally, this is a buff to Lone Druid. Given that Lone Druid was quite strong before, I think he's going to be quite strong in the next patch as well. Also notably absent from this patch is Beastmaster, who wasn't picked all that much at the major, but is doing really well in high-level pubs. So I guess it's a good sign for Beastmaster players that the hero was not nerfed. So if you're looking for a hero to start practicing in your offlaner, definitely recommend Beastmaster. He's quite strong in this meta. Speaking of quite strong offlaners, Enchantress also wasn't touched. She was one of the most dominant heroes in the last couple of days of the major, but she doesn't get any sort of nerfs, which is kind of surprising. So if you liked playing Enchantress, do it now before she gets nerfed, because I am almost certain that she's going to be nerfed in the upcoming B and C patches. And of course, Enchantress is one of those heroes that can be played not only as a 3 but also as a 5 and even a 4. We saw some really nice position 5 Ench by Poppy at the major. We actually managed to outfarm the enemy mid laner with his Enchantress, even though he was playing position 5. Because you can actually farm quite well with Enchantress these days with her creeps and all the bonus damage they get. I think we're actually going to make a video on that game, even though it's now in the last patch since Ench wasn't changed. I guess it's still appropriate. Just going to have to see whether the replays will let me do that, because there was a bunch of bugs with replays from before patch 7.23, so maybe there's going to be bugs here too. So if I'm not making this video, then the next video will be my micro guide for Lone Druid. In either case, if you don't want to miss that, please subscribe to this channel and ring the bell, and I'll see you next time.